his strategy simplified. It's Japheth here, your producer, and I really quickly wanted to pop in to tell you about Black Belt. So if you're targeting a consulting role at a firm like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, Oliver Wyman, Accenture, you name it, Black Belt is a structured case prep program that might be exactly what you need to push you over the hump and land that offer. So it is a structured case coaching program where you'll get one-on-one coaching from a former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG consultant. You'll also get a year of free access to our new community for exclusive employer info sessions, training, master classes, community support, and much more. Last but not least, you get unlimited digital materials to support your case prep progress. Oh, and by the way, over 80% of Black Belts who complete the program land a consulting role. That's pretty incredible. So we'd love to see you inside of Black Belt. Join at the link in the show notes. Ryan Boutwell summered at McKinsey and then received a return offer to go full-time with the firm starting in 2024. And in this conversation, we're hearing all about his journey, including tips and tricks for navigating the recruiting process. He shares some incredible questions to ask in your networking conversation to figure out if a firm is right for you and if you're a right fit for the firm. He also gives wisdom on how to make your office selections, really good insight there. He shares insight into preparation for your case interviews and how to identify your gap areas and much more. It's a really fascinating conversation. Without further ado, here's my combo with Ryan. Ryan Boutwell, welcome to Strategy Simplified. Looking forward to having you on the podcast today. Can you just kick us off and tell us who you are, share a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me today, Japheth. It's great to be here. A little bit about me. I grew up in Texas, out south of Fort Worth in a small town. I went to undergrad at UT Arlington and then did a master's in finance at UT Austin at the Macomb School. I made that transition because I started out wanting to go into the Big Four and work in traditional accounting jobs, and then took the master's in finance route because I found it wasn't for me, and actually transitioned into investment banking after that. Worked for about 3 years doing investment banking, traditional M&A sell side type of work. And then I came to kind of a pivot point in my career where I was thinking about private equity or doing something different. And I took a job working in corporate strategy because I got interested in understanding kind of how businesses operated. So I knew that I was pretty good in Excel, could do some kind of neat things in PowerPoint, but I didn't really know how things worked. So I used the example of inventory. I didn't even know how people made decisions about inventory. I just knew what it was in a spreadsheet. And after that, I spent 2 years working in corporate strategy. And then that's kind of what prompted me to go get my MBA and ultimately pursue the path in consulting that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later. But right now I'm at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. Just started my second year, finished up my summer internship at McKinsey in Chicago, and am thankfully going back at the end of my second year after graduation to start full time.
Okay. Well, that's a very concise overview of your journey up to this point. Really appreciate that. And we're going to double click into a few different pieces of that, most notably your transition into consulting and some tips, tricks, best practices from your journey there. But one other thing that you are is a content intern here at Management Consulted. So, really enjoying having you on the team and looking forward to getting your story out to our audience. So
yeah,
you're at Darden. Can you share a little bit more about the kind of framework or rationale behind both like why an MBA and why now, and also like what specifically stood out to you about Darden?
Yeah, so I really thought about an MBA twice. The second time being whenever I ultimately decided to make the decision. So after being in investment banking for about 2.5, going on 3 years, I realized that private equity wasn't for me, and I started talking to friends that I knew that had gone and gotten their MBA. And the way that I saw it is the schools that I was looking at, really that 3-year mark was kind of the floor for work experience, and that was probably going to be pushing it a little bit. And thankfully, I had some good friends that had actually gotten their MBAs after about 3 years of work experience, whether it was in banking or in consulting or whatever the case may be. And interestingly enough, they told me that the people in their MBA programs that had spent a little bit more time and were a little bit more introspective and understood not only what they wanted to do, but why they wanted to do it coming out of the MBA program seemed to be more successful in their paths and dealt with a lot less stress because they were just kind of focused on what they wanted to accomplish. So ultimately took that advice, punted on the MBA, and went and took a corporate strategy job. I thought that private equity was going to be a little bit more of the same, whereas corporate strategy would help me kind of understand how businesses operate. Why do they make the decisions they make? What do CFOs and CEOs think about? Those types of things. So I took a job at a company named Vistion Corporation. And interestingly enough, the CFO of that organization was my first ever client in investment banking. And he took the job as CFO kind of right when COVID kicked off. And he reached out and said, hey, I need some people in the organization that know how to do that cool little fancy modeling stuff that you guys did for me a few years back. Would you mind helping me out? And the way that he kind of sold the job to me is he said, you're going to do some M&A type of stuff that you're probably very used to, and you're going to help me do things that you've probably never seen before, like understand why our inventory management is terrible right now. So I thought that that was a really cool opportunity and something I couldn't really pass up. And I basically said to him, I would love to join the team. I think I'm happy to sign up for 2 years because I want to explore potentially getting an MBA. And he said, great. So the entire time that I was there, really, I basically talked to him probably on a weekly or every other week basis about, what am I doing? What do I want to accomplish with an MBA and the next steps of my career? And it kept pointing back to consulting. And we worked across the table we were BCG's client. And so I was fortunate also enough to interact with their team and say, hey, why are you guys doing this? Like, why do you look at things this way? And, they would give me insights. And I found the job to be just fascinating. It mixed a lot of the things that I liked about investment banking, which was kind of the fast-paced culture, very sharp individuals, kind of constantly on the go. But it also tied in a lot of the things that I liked about corporate strategy in my job at Vistion, which was, why do we make the decisions we're making, problem solving, looking at things from a different lens, trying to be creative. And so I really saw it as kind of a great opportunity and ultimately pursued the MBA path with the intention being that I would become a career switcher and move into management consulting. And, thankfully it worked out for me.
That's awesome. It sounds like mixed in there with your transition or to consulting or your kind of desire to go in there was like a desire for growth, like a growth mindset, right? Starting yourself with the brightest people, challenging yourself, which is really cool. So, and I think that's something that any aspiring consultant should aspire to step into if they want to go into this field, because it's ever evolving.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think I was very fortunate to have a really good relationship with my boss kind of day one because I'd previously worked with him. But he was very good about always pushing me to think about why things happen, not just what we're actually doing. And that obviously took first priority in the work that we were doing. But then as I worked alongside BCG and we talked to other consulting firms along the way, it became pretty apparent, I guess, to me that they were also thinking about things like that and asking kind of important questions and trying to dig into details. So, I think it was a natural fit for me, and I just kind of enjoyed what I saw, enjoyed what I did, and it worked out really well.
What are some of the skills that you gained pre-consulting? Like, just let's like pick one or two that you think are really going to help you out in consulting.
Yeah, so I think, in typical kind of consulting fashion, right? The way that I would think about this is really like a hard skills and a soft skills situation. So from a hard skills perspective, there's certain things that consultants do, right? It's working in Excel, it's working in PowerPoint, it's, doing data analysis, it's, conveying a message. And I think that I was very fortunate to have very good training in a lot of those things, kind of the hard skills through my investment banking and the corporate strategy background. So I think that's one easy one to point to. But I think the more important one that I learned was a soft skill. And that was just kind of the ability to ask questions about things that I was seeing. So the typical way that we worked whenever I was in corporate strategy was there would be kind of an analytical process that we would go through. There would be some data that we would look at to answer a question. And maybe it was, should inventory be this high in this particular plant? And so we would look at the data and we would analyze trends and put something together in PowerPoint. But when we put the PowerPoint together and took it to my CFO at the time, we weren't saying like, this is the answer most of the time. Most of the time we were saying, these are the questions that we need to ask in order to answer your question. So it was learning how to ask him questions about the context and then dig deeper into the team that was closer to the actual inventory management system to say, why are you doing things the way that you do? The numbers tell one story, but then when you dig into the context, the numbers become a lot more fruitful and you start to understand not only what the numbers say, but what they mean. And that's how you can make decisions. Now, my summer at McKinsey, I was working on an automotive client and we were doing basically some operations transformation stuff. And I found that skill to be very useful because it was, one, very comfortable to me because we were looking at similar problems as what I had dealt with before. But also I found it to be just valuable in helping me learn because I was asking associate partners, even just engagement managers, guys and girls that were just a couple of years older than me in their consulting careers. And they just had so much more insight than me. So being able to ask those questions actually helped me do better work and I think become a better consultant even over the 8 to 10 weeks or so that I was there.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Have you ever heard a new digital trend and thought to yourself, okay, does this really matter? Asking the right questions helps you cut through the noise and get down to what matters most. I'm Jim Hertzfeld, host of the What If, So What podcast, where we discover what's possible with digital and figure out how to make it real by asking what if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Subscribe and listen, and together we can turn big ideas into tangible actions so you can get shit done.
I love that second part, especially the asking the right questions to get to the root of what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah.
How do you get over the fear of looking, for lack of better words, stupid, right? Like asking these questions that you're like, I don't know the answer, but I don't want to look like an idiot.
Yeah. No, I mean, frankly, I don't know that you ever fully get over. At least I don't know that I do. For me, frankly, the way that I approached that situation is I just tried to come to the table as prepared as I could for questions. So if I had a question about a particular number, a particular data set, or I was saying, I don't know what this acronym means. First of all, I try to figure it out on my own, spend a little time, but not spin my wheels. For all you aspiring consultants out there, you'll hear that a million times. But I think just coming prepared and showing whoever it is that you're asking those questions to that you've tried on your own, I think goes a long way. Inevitably, I was wrong or was looking in the wrong places, I guess, 99.9% of the time. But I think that that's kind of the key is just showing these people that you're working with that you're trying because nobody hates anything more than their time being wasted. And I think if you come to the table and say, I don't know what this means and I don't want to do the work to figure it out, that's a little annoying. If you show up and you say, I've looked in these different areas, tried to answer this question these different ways, and I just can't figure it out, or you're just kind of lost and you don't know where to go, like that's a very different conversation than saying like, I just didn't do anything and don't know. So showing up prepared and just, showing to everybody and displaying to everybody that you're trying and you just can't get there all the way is a totally different way to look at it, and I think worked for me. Yeah.
You're taking ownership. You're not just coming to the table with a blank question, but you're actually saying, "Hey, I've looked into this." I love that. I think that's really critical.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because that's basically the way that consulting firms work, right? Because it's the hypothesis-driven approach to everything.
Yeah, I was thinking that when you're talking. Exactly.
Yeah.
Come to the table with a perspective.
Exactly. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. If there's anything folks take away from this conversation, like it's that answer first, hypothesis kind of driven point of approaching things. All right, let's transition to your kind of recruiting process into consulting. So just give us a little bit of an overview of that. Did you kind of have on-campus resources? Did you go to coffee chats? Did you, what did the application process look like, networking, et cetera? Just give us a broad overview, and then we'll kind of dive deeper into a few areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I came into Darden definitely understanding fairly well like what consulting was. So I definitely realized that I was at a little bit of an advantage kind of from that perspective. Where Darden really helped me out and where the on-campus resources played a huge role for me is I had no idea how to recruit consulting. It was totally different than anything that I'd ever done before. And I was extremely intimidated by the case study interview process. So Darden was huge in saying basically like, look, do these things between these months, do these things between these months, start practicing cases here, blah, 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 move on, and then boom, you'll have an outcome. And frankly, I just followed that approach to a T and did exactly what they told me to do, and it worked out. The most challenging piece for me, to be completely honest, was probably, I would say is probably kind of the early stages of networking, because I think that there's an expectation that you're asking certain questions, you're doing certain things, and there's sort of a kind of a song and dance that you're playing with each other as you get to know one another. And it was a little uncomfortable. I think I navigated it okay, but that was the biggest challenge for me. I enjoyed the casing the most, which people told me was a good sign, probably pointed to me potentially liking consulting a decent amount. But the networking aspects, especially early on, were definitely the most challenging for me, I think.
Okay. Let's talk about that song and dance a little bit more. And so let's just speak to, first year MBAs. Like right now is the time when they're going through this process for a lot of folks when this episode comes out. So how do folks approach that kind of song and dance as you mentioned? Can you share a couple pieces of advice, some kind of tactical steps for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that so what I struggled with is trying to fit into the box that I thought they wanted me to fit into. So I thought going into the process, like, oh, I should be asking about their staffing model and understand what makes them different. I should be asking about, what type of work that, I'll work on if I'm in this city or if I'm in that city. And I think I got a little caught up early on in trying to kind of fit the mold that the consulting firms were looking for me to fit, if that makes sense. But that approach really just didn't work for me. One, I didn't always find those conversations interesting, to be completely honest. But two, it didn't really help me get to know the firm and the people very well, I think. Because if there's one thing that I've learned about my previous careers before Darden, it's that the work you do is certainly important, but what's more important is the people that you're doing that work with. So whenever I shifted my approach and stopped focusing on those things and just asked very honest and frank questions of people, things like, what's been the most challenging day that you've had? Have you ever had a day where you've just thought about quitting? You start to pull things out of people whenever you ask some of those questions that are a little bit more insightful, I think, to the culture of the organization that you're recruiting with. And to be honest, I was a little nervous to ask those types of questions at first, but I found that the different consultants that I talked to were very receptive to those questions. They want you to want to be there as bad as they want you to be the right candidate, I guess, so to speak. They don't want to get a good candidate that's a robot that fits all the boxes that they have. They want somebody that can do the job, do it well, but like wants to be there and wants to do that. So once I shifted my approach on networking and started asking more kind of personal culture related questions, things went a lot smoother for me. And frankly, I learned a lot more about the firms, and it helped me kind of identify my top choices and, the places that I wanted to be, locations and all that. So that was a really helpful transition for me.
I love that. And I think asking questions that you're actually interested in the answer, not just what you think is the right thing, will also inform kind of the rest of your recruiting experience and your cover letter. And I know McKinsey doesn't require one right now, but you can reference those conversations and specific aspects of the firm and culture that you love and put them in your cover letter. And that tells the firm that you're actually genuinely interested and you talk to people.
Yeah.
You know what's expected.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the things that I did to kind of directly give kind of tactical advice to folks that are interested is as the networking process moved forward, I actually had a list of key questions that I needed to answer before I could actually determine whether or not I wanted to go to a firm. So some of them were I wanted to hear from people about what was their worst day. Was it a long night at the office? Because that's going to happen in consulting here and there. Or was it, a way that they were treated? I wanted to know some of those hard questions. So I actually made a list of questions that I needed answers to before I could determine, if I wanted to go work at certain places. And that was really helpful for me.
I think folks will be really interested in knowing what those questions are. If you feel comfortable, do you mind sharing like a few more?
Yeah, so one of the top priorities for me about every firm was about promotion cycles. I wanted to just understand how those decisions were made and then also what the expectations were in terms of timing. Because what I didn't want to deal with is I didn't want a firm to tell me, you need to be in this position for 3 years in order to get a promotion, regardless of how good or bad you are. What I wanted a firm to tell me was, if you're ready in 1 month, we'll promote you in 1 month. If it takes you 4 years, it's going to take you 4 years. So that was one thing that was a big question mark for me. Another thing for me was about travel. So I told every firm that I would love to travel 46 plus weeks out of the year whenever I get started. But eventually, I'm going to want to have a family and maybe won't want to travel that much. Is it possible for me to scale that back if I'm still at the firm? And if the answer was just a no, that's going to kind of prohibit you from moving up within the firm, that was kind of a non-starter for me. But if there was some sort of flexibility in there, that was good. And then the last thing, like I mentioned before, was I wanted to know what people's worst day was. Because this kind of goes back to my background a little bit, but in my pre-Darden lifetime, I did not like the culture that I dealt with, and I frequently had colleagues that would come in and just quit. Take that for what it's worth, because the cultures at the places I worked at before were a little different than what they are in consulting. But I wanted to know, what has been your worst day and what drove that? Was it a partner breathing down your neck, somebody that you were constantly dealing with? Or was it a long night at the office? It told me a little bit about the people that I was interacting with, but it also told me a little bit about the culture of the firm too. So I think those are kind of the top three. And I guess the other thing that I'll mention is weekend work. So again, being at a little bit different stage in life now, I think having some semblance of a work-life balance is important to me. I don't want it to be an expectation that I'm working every weekend. I know that certain times that will be the case because there are certain instances where you just can't avoid it. But that's very different than an expectation that I'm working every Sunday morning or that I'm working every Saturday afternoon or something like that. So I wanted to know what the expectations were going to be about weekend work. So I'd say those were kind of the key ones for me if I had to kind of pick a few.
Oh, those are awesome. Thank you for sharing them. Really fascinating, really great questions. I love what was your worst day one, especially. That's awesome. Quickly, if you have any insight into office choices. So, most firms will let you list up to 3 offices. We get questions around this every day, right? Like, how should I, order my office preferences? Is it, the ones I think are most likely, have more space or more likely to get me a job, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting one because this is a huge question that I'm getting from people in the first year class here at Darden right now. So I'll tell you, the way that I approached it was frankly pretty simple. So I basically just thought, where do I want to live? I didn't think about the size of the office. I didn't think, how competitive is it going to be to recruit in this office versus that office? Which actually, to be completely honest, I chose kind of the opposite in my choice. I was told that the Chicago office for McKinsey, where I recruited, turned out to be extremely competitive the year that I was going there. And it worked out for me because I think that you're going to be unhappy if you choose, this office or that office, thinking that you have an opportunity to game the system. Because then whenever you get there, are you going to do well if you're unhappy every day that you're back at your home? That's not really a good situation to be in. So I chose the city that I wanted to live in, and that happened to be Chicago. Now, I have an interest in working in heavy industrials, manufacturing, automotive type clients, and that happens to be an area of the United States that is very focused on that type of work. So that did play to my advantage, but that did not come into my decision making framework. The one thing that I've commonly told different first years that I interact with that have questions about the competitive dynamics of offices, such as, do I recruit in this office versus this office? Because there's a ton of MBA programs near this office, but not many near this one. I always tell first year candidates the same thing, and that is, you have a lot of control over how good of a candidate you are, right? You have the ability to prep, you have the ability to network, you have the ability to understand all the dynamics of the case interview, the behavioral portions of the interview, etc. So I always encourage people to take that part, the competitiveness of the office, out of it, and instead just focus on being their number one candidate. Because the number one candidate that recruits at New York, Charlotte, somewhere out on the West Coast, Dallas, is most likely going to get a job offer. And so if you just take the competitiveness of the office out of the equation altogether, that should simplify a lot of people's decision-making process. And you're also thinking about controlling the things that you can control, which personally for me is an important way of looking at the world.
I love that. This theme of like personal ownership keeps popping up, right? Like control what you can control, take ownership of what's yours, and don't try to game the system or the external factors that you can't control. That's really, really great advice.
Yeah. I hope it's helpful, and I know that's sometimes a little bit of a different way that people think about it, but that works for me personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. All right, well, let's talk about the case interview. So, can you share your kind of prep plan or prep process that you underwent to land the McKinsey offer? And then I might have some deeper questions into that.
Yeah, so I'll be honest and tell you that I started off on a bad track. So I started off saying, look, I want to do 75 cases, I think is what the number was. And everybody said, no, you don't need to do that many. First of all, second of all, you don't need to pick a number and strive for that. And I said, yeah, you guys, fine. I'm doing 75 cases. So I started off doing several a week. I think there was multiple days, even at the beginning, where I was doing a couple a day. And I quickly burned out and realized that I didn't feel like I was improving. And so I took a step back and refocused my efforts. And what I did was I made a list of things. I said, these are the things I'm good at. These are the things I'm bad at. And what I found was that I was really good on the quantitative aspects of casing. I could do pretty good mental math. I had a good feel for how to take a kind of linear structure and walk people through the different equations and the way that I was thinking about solving the problems. But what I was terrible at was frameworks, which was arguably the most important part, I think, to a lot of people, and brainstorming. And I kept asking myself, why are you bad at these things? Like these should be easier. So I just focused my efforts outside of casing on studying those, learning about those, and then would come back to casing. So what ultimately ended up happening is I think I did around 40 cases or so in total, but I would actually do a case at the beginning of the week, then identify weaknesses from that case and go in and do individual study on my own on those different topics, such as frameworks, brainstorming, whatever the case may be. And then I would go back and actually redo the case that I did earlier that week, not with a partner, but just on my own, read through it and just think through, how would I answer this now that I think I've gotten better at things? And then I would push that case to the side and move on and redo that process again. So it became very iterative, and it became very much a kind of study at your own pace type of process for me, with cases baked in there. But that's when I started to feel like I was very comfortable casing and got to a point where I thought, all right, I am feeling confident that I'm going to do well whenever these interviews actually come around.
So there's no magic number, huh?
I wish there was, and I wish it was like 10, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you identified your weaknesses or your gap areas, and you kind of stepped out of the casing process and kind of were intentional about addressing those areas. And you came back and like drilled down on those, very much in line with what we at Management Consulted teach. So I love that. I think it's going to be super helpful for people.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean this might sound canned, but it's really not. I spent a lot of time reading on Management Consultant about how to approach case prep, and that was one of the takeaways that I did have, reading the different blogs and the written content, because I just didn't know how to do it. I just thought if you just brute force power through it and just case, you'll get better. And that just really wasn't the case, not for me.
We'll be right back after this quick break.
Hey, you. Yeah, you listening. Do you like personal finance or real estate? Are you itching to build wealth and create a better life for yourself or your family? Then you need to come check out the Life, Money, and More podcast with real estate agent, YouTuber, and actor Sage Weiss. This isn't your average finance show. We dive deep and do not sugarcoat topics around money and life. The Life, Money, and More podcast releases 2 episodes a week just for you, because we're all about helping you win in this crazy world we live in. Come join the thousands of listeners on the Life, Money, and More podcast.
Yeah, you said it best. Cool. Well, as we're getting close to wrapping up here, do you have one kind of resource that you went to throughout the process, whether it was in networking or office selection or case interviews, but one kind of resource or tool that was really helpful in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest resource for me personally was the second years of my MBA program, frankly. It's the old saying, I guess, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, kind of comes to the top of my head here, because it's kind of interesting to sit on the other side of the table in case with one of your friends in your MBA class. But I just wanted to get a feel for like, what is this actually going to be like when I sit across the table from McKinsey and interview? And the best resources for that for me were the second years at my MBA program, because the cases themselves, the actual content and the actual flow of the case, the way it was laid out was exactly what I expected. But I was sitting on the other side of the table from senior partners at these firms, and they just ran a case very differently than the 27, 28-year-old MBA students that I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis at Darden. So I think talking to the second years and just saying like, hey, what is this actually going to be like was super beneficial. The other resource too that I'll plug is just any online resource. I mentioned Management Consultant because I looked at the website almost daily, it seems like, but I just wanted to have my finger on the pulse and just understand like what were people out there saying. And reading the blogs and reading the different written content was super helpful for me, just to contextualize, to learn little tips and tricks here and there, to just kind of make myself just a little bit better at certain things. Because again, I took the mindset that if I prepared as much as I thought necessary to make myself the number one candidate, then I would get a job. And if I didn't, then I was putting it up to chance. So I felt like reading the different blogs and the written content to keep my finger on the pulse and understand what other people were saying about this process was really helpful as well.
Yeah, there's the kind of hunger to learn and grow mindset again coming up. So I love that. That's been a theme here today.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
One piece of advice for a first year MBA, trying to get an internship.
So my biggest piece of advice is actually not going to be related to casing or networking or anything like that. My biggest piece of advice is sit down and ask yourself if you think you'll like management consulting and learn about the industry. I think that being happy in your job and liking what you do is far more important than being able to stick McKinsey on your resume. Chances are, if you're in an MBA program, you've probably been relatively successful in your career. And I don't think that successful people come from this organization or that organization. Successful people have something in their DNA that makes them do things and do things well. And so if you're one of those people that's already at a top MBA program, you don't need McKinsey or BCG or Bain or something like that on your resume. But what you do need is you need to be happy in your job. So just make sure that you actually want to do it before you jump in, because it's a demanding gig, and it's not going to let up just because you're unhappy.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever had that specific piece of advice on the podcast, and I love it. So thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Absolutely. And for me, I mean, when I came in, I wanted to do something where I could spend 3 to 5 years doing that. And I am not going to spend 3 to 5 years being unhappy just to get a place like McKinsey on my resume. So I did a lot of introspection and really asked myself some hard questions before I made the jump. And I think it benefited me.
Life's too short to waste 3 years at a job you hate. Yeah.
That's right. Plenty of other opportunities out there that'll make you just as happy. And, yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah. What are you most looking forward to about starting full time at McKinsey? And then now that you've gone through a summer, you'll have finished your MBA. What's exciting to you?
Honestly, it's just the people. And I know that's kind of a canned answer, but I met so many interesting people whenever I was there. People that had traveled the world, people that had worked in different White House administrations before they went and got their MBA, people that didn't have their MBA at all, went and got their PhD in nuclear physics or something. You just meet so many interesting people when you're going into consulting. And that's kind of what makes those organizations so great, I guess, is because they bring such a diverse group of minds to every problem solving approach. So on my project over the summer, I was reaching out to a senior partner that sat in Germany, I believe, and had worked for one of our clients' competitors, 20 years ago. And we were asking him questions and learn about his background and stuff. I was like, wow, this is crazy. I'm 30 years old. I'm an intern. I'm talking to this guy. Like, this is wild. So that's what I'm most excited about, I think, is just all the different people that I'll have the opportunity to interact with and learn from, frankly.
Yeah, I'm excited for you.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Lots to look forward to. Well, we are going to transition to the last segment. We're going to ask you a few get to know you questions. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. What's one item on your bucket list?
One item on my bucket list is to go skydiving in New Zealand. So when I lived in Chicago, I started going skydiving a little bit, and I was actually in the process of going through kind of a class where you become eligible to jump and skydive on your own. There was this little known thing called coveted that started that I'm sure nobody's heard of that ruined my abilities to actually finish that, but I would like to start jumping again if I can whenever I move back to Chicago, and I'd have to go do it in New Zealand sometime.
Dude, that sounds wild. I have yet to do that.
I highly recommend. I'll tell you though, the second time is scarier than the first time, for whatever that's worth.
Oh, that doesn't help, bro. Yeah, that's great. All right. Do you have a hidden talent?
A hidden talent of mine is, this is a hard one, actually.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a strange story, but on the side, I actually own a small business. So I own a dog grooming shop. So my hidden talent is I can groom a dog.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
not every day you hear that.
Yeah, I figured once I bought the business, I didn't know anything about grooming dogs. So I just was like, let me just learn how to do this so I can understand the process. So I've only groomed maybe like 2 dogs my whole life, but I know how to do it.
Yeah, that's 2 more dogs than I've groomed, so you're winning there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what's to end this off? What's your favorite or go-to weekend hobby or passion?
Yeah, so that I would have to say that's actually become tennis now. So I picked up tennis at Darden right after recruiting, And I love it. I've been taking lessons now for going on like 6-7 months. I love it. I think that I'll be a lifetime tennis player from now on. I stay pretty active though. So I work out quite a bit on the weekends, go hiking, things like that. But my top weekend passion or hobby is probably tennis right now.
That's awesome. Love that. All right, Ryan, thank you for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with our community. Grateful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Ryan, we would love a rating and review. It helps tell the algorithm that you're enjoying the show and that other people need to listen to us. So really appreciate you in advance for leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you again on another episode soon.